Hello guys and welcome to this video tutorial. This time I will show you how to create a full stack application in which we will have a client, we will have a server, and we will have a database. The client will have the user interface in which we will have two images, and each image will have a delete button or the equivalent to a delete button. Once the client clicks on one of these deletes, the ID of the property will be passed to the server. If this property has an ID of 1 and this property has an ID of 2, that ID is the one that will be sent to the server. If the client clicks on this button delete, this number 1, which is the ID of the property, will be sent to the server over here. This ID 1 is passed to the server. The server will talk to the text file, which is, by the way, the database, and it will try to find in the text file entries a match between this ID 1 and the IDs in the text file. If there is a match, the server will actually delete the match of the ID between the ID and the text file. So this entry will be gone. After the deletion is completed, the server will send back to the client a JSON file, JSON text actually, that will be converted to a JSON object in the client side, and this will also be deleted. Alright guys, let's get to the code. First of all, we need to start the server. In my computer I'm using Apache port 80, which is already up and running down here. To test it, we can go to localhost, and we will see something like this, in my computer at least. In your computer you might have some folders inside the htdocs that will give you some data here. I go to my htdocs folder, which is the entry point for all my files that will provide a website to the browser, and I will create a new folder. The folder will be called fullstack. Once the folder is created, actually I can show it to you here, that's the folder I have inside my default application xampp. So inside the htdocs I have fullstack. I will have to go now to the Visual Studio Code. I will create a new window and I will point to that folder that I just created. In this case, I say File, don't mind that message there, Open Folder, Fullstack. I just selected it, nothing else. Let me just get here. I do not open it, I only select it and then I click Select Folder. I don't need a welcome screen, I don't need these open editors displayed, just the full stack. In here I will create the data file, which is the database. Let's call it data.json. Inside this data.json I will hardcode actually the properties. For the sake of this scenario, I will create P1 that will be the ID of property 1, and P1 actually points to an object. This could have a price, the property price is 1, it could have an image, it could have an address, and so on. We don't need that. And then I will just hardcode P2, the price of P2 will be 2. I cannot end up with a comma because that's the last element in my JSON object, therefore I delete it. This is the database, and that's what we're going to get rid of, for example P1 or P2. When the user deletes P1, this will be gone. If the user deletes P2, that will be gone. We will do that via the server. In order for us to manipulate and to interact with this data.json file, we need an API. I will create this API and I will call it API-delete-property. An API must have an action as the name of it. You don't have to, but it's advisable. And I will do the .php because this API is being coded in a PHP file. I will open the PHP tags. You do not need to close it, just leave it unclosed. And over here, we're going to interact with the text file. If we look at the diagram, we can see that the server will actually receive an ID from the client. Now I set P1 and P2, so the ID here will be P1 and the ID here will be P2 for each of the properties. If the client clicks on that delete button, what will happen is that this P1, the ID of that property, P1 will be passed to the server will get P1, and now the server will try to find a match between this P1, which is the ID of the property, and the P1 that I have in the text file. If a match is found, that P1 will be deleted. So that's what I'm trying to build here now. In order for us to interact with the file, we actually need to do a file get contents, and we are going to open the file called data.json. The content of this file is plain text. It is the content of this file, and I will put the return value of it inside a variable, and I will call the variable sjData. I call it sjData. It seems weird to some of you, but it's because I'm going to get a string that looks like JSON, and data is because it contains a set of data for properties. Since this is text, I just got text out of the text file, I have to convert the text to a JSON object. So I will say JData equals, and then I will JSON decode to convert it into an object, and I will decode this text sjData. This will be convert text into an object. You must convert text into the object so you can play with it, so you can manipulate the object, so you can update it, so you can delete it, you can create new elements into it. So you have to have a JSON object to do that. Once you have this JData, what you have to do is we have to consider what it is that the client will pass to the server. The client is passing an ID for the property, and this could be done via a get or via a post. This could be a button, this could be a hyperlink. For now, I don't even know if I will do a button or a hyperlink, but I know that the server will get an ID from the client, and that will happen via Ajax. That's the point of this tutorial. To do that, I will say that the delete property will get an ID. I will call it sPropertyID, and I call it sPropertyID because everything that you pass via get or post is actually an ID, and I will pretend that I get this via get, and I will pass the ID via the get protocol. This ID could be P1, this ID could be P2, this ID could be P something. P is just standing for property, so you know that that's the ID. Once I get the ID, I open the file, I convert it into an object, and now I'm going to delete the property from that object. I already know the ID that's P1 and P2, and I already know that I'm getting that in this ID. So for now, I will hardcode the ID. No, I will not hardcode, I will just pass it via the ID. And then I will do this. I will say JData, which is all this. I need to point to this P1, which is the key of the JSON object. I will hardcode P1, and then I will just put in front of it the function called onSet. This function will actually delete the element with that key, in this case P1. Later on, I will use this property ID and replace it down here. Since this is a test, I'm just building this prototype. So this is enough for now. Once I have deleted the ID, all this is happening in RAM. I need to write it back to the hard disk. So I need to write this JSON object back to the data.json. To do that, I convert the JSON object back into text. This variable here will contain the text, so I will call the function called JSON encode, and I will encode my object, the JData object. This will say convert JSON to text. The only thing I can save back in the file is actually text. It's impossible to put a JSON object inside a file. It must be text. Now that I want to save it back, I will say file put contents, and this function will actually write text to file. The file put contents takes this argument sjData, which is the text of it, and this will be the second argument. Actually, the first argument is the file that I want to save it to. The file I want to save it to is the data.json file, and the second argument is the text that I want to save to the file. This JSON encode will put my object in one line, and I want to make it look good, so it actually should look like this, readable, human readable. So what I will do is I will pass a second argument called JSON pretty print. I save it. I'm going to go to the browser and I'm going to point to this API, to this service. I go to the browser, I say localhost. We have the full stack folder that I built before, click on it, and then I have the API delete property. When I click on the API delete property, I see that this index has not been defined in line number 2, and that is because in line number 2, I am not passing any values via the URL. I'm not doing this get or query string correctly. But I have hard-coded P1, I deleted P1, and then I save back to the file. When we look back into the file, P1 is gone. Now this P1 should not be hard-coded. I'm going to replace it with a property ID, sProperty ID, which contains whatever I pass in get. I save it. I will try to set P1 back. I just did Control Z, so I actually undo the previous change and then I save it back. To test the API delete property again, I will have to pass an ID via the address bar. So I go to the address bar and then I will say ID equals P1. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing here. It could also be ID equals P2. It could be any ID that you have in the text file. So I will say P1. That's the ID I'm going to pass. When I click enter, my API doesn't echo anything, but when I look at the data.json, P1 is gone because I pass via the get protocol the variable P1. I will now, via the get protocol, I will actually pass the variable P2. I will hit enter. I will zoom out again. When I look at my data.json, P2 is gone because I deleted that entry in the text file. As you can see, this is working fine. You could have a to-do where you need to validate, where you need to constrain the values, where you need to check for many things that you could do with ID. For now, this is working fine. That's the API. I will undo twice, so I get the original property here. Let's build now the front end. I'm going to create a page called index.html, and this index page will only have the images that I told you about in the beginning. Let's create an HTML template, and I will call this title full stack. I save it. Before I continue, I will move back to the page, to the browser, and I will point now to full stack. If I hit enter, I will see the index page that says full stack, and that's the full stack you see here. You do not need to do index.php because by default, it actually points to that page. And I don't even have the index.php, I actually have index.html. So this should be index.html. If I don't do index.html, the default full stack will point to that page. Let's do now here an h1 just to see that the changes are being saved correctly, and then I will say full stack. Save it and test it. Full stack. Now that I have this done, I will hard code the two images. If this was an advanced tutorial, I should open the file, I should loop. I was going to put a PHP comment here. It should be an HTML comment. You should open the file, convert it to JSON, loop through the JSON properties, and create the HTML elements. This should be what you could do if you wanted to display the properties coming from the file. Since I don't want to do that, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. I will create here a div, and this div will be the div for the first property. It's actually going to be this div here. It will contain property 1, then I will build the second div, which will be the div for property 2. I create the div. Inside this div, I will have an image tag, and this image will have an src, which is the source of it. I don't have any images here. I will build them in a second, and I will call it 1.png, and then I will have the 2.png. Let me create the images first. I go to Paint, and then I'm going to draw two properties. Keep it really simple. I'm going to pretend that property 1 is going to be a house that is red. I will do the red house here, and then I will save it inside the same directory where I have the full stack folder. I will zoom in so you can see why I save it. I will say this PC. I will go to C, that's my default installation of XAMPP. I will find XAMPP. I will go to htdocs. I will open full stack, and then I will call this 1.png because that's the name I gave to it. I'm going to save it. It is already saved. I'm going to create a second property. It's going to be a blue house. Going to be a house that's a little bit bigger. Pretend that's the house. Let me just undo. It doesn't look like a house, so I make it look like a house like this. I will save this, and I will save it as a different image. So now I will save it as 2.png. You're welcome to use any image that you want. That's just for simplicity reasons. If I look at my properties here, I have 1 and 2. 1 is the red house, 2 is the blue house. So now I can say 1.png, and after this image, I will actually create the button that I told you about. The button will say delete. Then I will test it. I'm not going to click in the button, not yet. So what I will do is I will check here the red house with the delete. Nothing really happens there if I click on it. Now I'm going to copy this div, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to create the second div. The second div has the 2.png house and the delete on it. I save, I test it. You can see the two images being displayed there. I'm going to quickly create a function in JavaScript. JavaScript must be placed at the bottom of your file just before you close the body tag. So I will create here a script element, a script tag. And this is going to be a script that will just do a very simple function. Function test me. This function will basically console.log, and it will console.log the letter X. When I click on this button, I want to call this function. When I click on that button, I want to call that function. So I will say on click equals, and this will say test me. That's a function, that's why I use parentheses. I know that you could have event listeners. I don't want to do this because I am only trying to complete my API, which is as simple as possible. This on click will call the function test me. I will copy this, and then I will paste it for the second button. So the second button will also call the test me function. I save it. I move to the browser. I do Ctrl+Shift+I, at least in Windows, or you could do right click, inspect, and then you will point to the console tab. When I click on delete, remember to reload the page. I click on delete, I see the letter X. I click on delete, I see the letter X. I see the X. Click, I see the X. So that's working fine. The idea is that I should be able to pass in here P1 and P2. If this was a loop, looping through the properties, somehow I will have extracted the ID of the property, and I could concatenate the ID inside this string. So I will hardcode it for now. I will say that that belongs to property 1, and I will hardcode it here, that belongs to property 2. Since I am passing one argument here, this function testMe will actually get an S property ID, which is the argument that I expect to get in this variable. Instead of console.log in the letter X, I will console.log S property ID. I save it, I reload the browser. When I click on delete, I see P1. When I click on this delete, I see P2. Click, P1, click, P2. This is what I want to delete. Before I connect to the API, I am going to go to this function and I'm going to give it a logical name. testMe is not a good name for it, so I will rename this function call, this function call, and this function declaration to something else. I double click on this testMe and then I do Control D. So basically I do a multiple selection, multiple cursor selection. I will do it again, double click, and then in my keyboard I press Control D without letting Control go up. Control D, and then I rename it. I will call this delete property. This is a better function name for it. Before I continue, I test it again, delete, nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Reload, delete, delete. I don't continue because I had a typo somewhere. I made a mistake somewhere here, and it's this one. I don't have a console.log. So I will say console.log, and I'm going to log this property ID. I save it, I reload, and then this is working fine. So now I have a better name for the function. Since I'm going to do Ajax, I will do it with jQuery. I'm going to quickly go to Google, Ajax, CDN, and I will point to the Google hosted libraries, in this case the one for jQuery. I go to jQuery here, let me zoom in so you can see it, jQuery, and I'm going to be using this version 3. So what I will do now is I will just copy that version 3, which is this one, from jQuery. This has to be selected. Copy the CDN, right click, copy, and let's put it in our application. You have to write it before the script tag that you declare yourself, because I will be using jQuery. So if I am going to use it, I need to declare this line before I actually use it. So it has to be before you own a script tag. I save it. I'm going to do a quick test. If I look at my page that I have this and that house, over here I'm going to create just a simple title. Let's pretend that's an H1 that says real estate. Save it, test it, real estate. I will do a very quick test with jQuery to see if that's working. Over here, directly inside the script, without calling any function, I will say jQuery, please select the element, and I'm going to select this H1 by the tag H1. Please select the element H1 and hide it. If this line runs fine, you don't need a semicolon, by the way, I'm not using it. If this line runs, it's because jQuery is inserted in your page correctly. I reload the page, the real estate is gone because I told it to hide the real estate. So jQuery is up and running. Inside the delete property, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to interact with the front end. Once you click on delete, pretend that I click here. As soon as I click on the delete button, I will get rid of property 1, so it will disappear from the screen. Let's do that. I will say jQuery, please select me, or select for me, and I want to select whatever I have clicked on. So I click on this button, but I want to go to the parent of the button. I want to go to this div. So I will say jQuery, this dot hide. Let me see if that's working, or else I will explain it to you. Delete, delete, nothing happens. Delete, delete, nothing really happens. So this is not doing anything. I'm passing P1. I need to delete this button. Since I want to delete the button only, I want to hide it in the screen, I will actually pass the first argument saying this, and the second argument will be p1. The same happens in the second function, this and p2. This refers to this element, the one that I click on, and this refers to this element, the one that I click on. So I will go, and in here I have to spec two elements. The first element is the button that I click on. So I will say that I expect to get an object called btn. It could be the first button, it could be the second button. So this is the object, then I can say select the object and hide it. I save it, I reload, and then I test it. The delete button is gone because this refers to the button. I pass this as the first argument here, and then I say hide the button, which is that one, for example. But I do not need to hide the button only. I also need to hide the whole div that contains the image and the button. I don't even need to hide it only, I need to remove it. Because when I hide it, if I inspect the elements here, you will see that the button, even though is not shown, is still part of the HTML DOM. You can see the button is there. And if I show you the second button, this one there, is still there. I only hide it, I did not remove it. So I need to use a function called remove, so I get rid of it. I go to the function, and I want to remove not only the button, I want to remove the parent that contains the button and the image. Let's see how I can select that. I say jQuery, please select me the button, then select me the parent and remove. If I select the parent, I will select this div and obviously the inner children, and I will remove it. Let me see if that runs. I save and I test. I reload the page, click delete, property 1 is gone, click delete, property 2 is gone. They are literally gone from the DOM. I reload, the properties are still there. Since this is working fine, I need to do Ajax now. This obtn is going to somehow allow me to pass p2. p2 is inside this s property ID. p1 is inside this s property ID. And it is this s property ID I want to pass to the API that I call API delete property via a get. I go to the front end and I'm going to remove it. And once I remove it, I'm going to send a command via Ajax to the server. This command that I use, at least, I like to use the three functions here, Ajax, done, and I like to do a fail. We're not going to use the fail, we're going to use just the done, but I let it be there. Ajax, done, and fail. Ajax takes one argument, which is a JSON object, and inside this argument, I will tell it where to point to. I need to tell this index page to point to the URL, which is called API delete property. So I will say point to the URL, and the URL is text, and it's called API delete property.php. So that's what I'm pointing to when I click on this, or when I call this function delete property. I also want to pass the s property ID in this URL. Therefore, I will say that the URL actually is going to pass a variable called ID. I define this variable ID because I declare it here, so it has to match. And I will say that ID equals, and in JavaScript I can concatenate this property ID by doing a plus. When I have this line, it says API delete property.php, and the ID is P1. If I have clicked on P1, this will contain P1, and if I have clicked on this button here, I will pass P2 to this variable, and therefore the ID will be P2. Once I have pass this to this API. When it is done, I will run this anonymous function. I will execute it. This function will receive, let's keep it simple. I said at the beginning JSON, let's just say sData. And the data that I will get is text. Therefore, I will just console.log. And then I will log whatever the server sent back to the client via Ajax. I will log sData. If we look at the API, this API has never sent anything back to the client because I don't have an echo. So I will echo now the property has been deleted. That's what I want to echo back to the client. This is PHP, so you must have a semicolon. This message, the property has been deleted, is going to be sent to the client via Ajax, and this function done will get the message inside the function, the variable called sData. So the property has been deleted will actually come here. Then I will console.log, the property has been deleted. I save it. I save the API. I move to the front page. I reload. I do have these two properties. And if you look at the property file, you will see that I have P1 and P2. I click on delete. I have deleted property 1 with ID P1 in the user interface. And if you look at the data file, property 1 is gone. If I click on the second property, which has the ID P2, I look at the text file and P2 is gone. Well guys, this is a live tutorial. I am not having any help on the side. So I hope you like it. I hope you enjoy it. And I will try to make more tutorials for you to understand all this thing about Ajax. I will resume it again quickly. You create an HTML page. These images should be created via a loop that you have the data from the text file. I will be able to click on this button or that button. This refers to this button and it's the first argument. P1 is something that I could have extracted from the loop. The same happens for button 2. I point to jQuery that is hosted in Google at this time. You can point to many different hosting libraries, like many different CDNs. And when I run my own script, I call the property, the lead property. The first argument is the button itself. It is all this. The second argument is P1 or P2. I say from the button, go to the parent and remove it. That's the button. All this is the parent. So all that gets deleted from the DOM. Then I do Ajax. I say that I want to point to this endpoint and I want to pass via the get or query string the ID P1 or P2. When I am done, when the client is done, it will get some data back from the client inside this variable, from the server inside this variable called sData, and then I will console.log sData. If I show you the console, I forgot to do that, you can see that you get the property has been deleted. That is coming from this line here. The server gets P1 or P2 from the API endpoint here. It opens the file, converts the file into a JSON object, deletes the property key that belongs to that JSON object, converts the file back into text, writes the text back into the file. This here, guys, let me rephrase it. Converts the JSON object back into text, and then it writes the text back to the file. Then it echoes the property has been deleted, and this message here is what the server, which is this API, sends to the client, which is this page. The property has been deleted gets in there, and you console.log that message. Thank you very much. See you guys.